more than one-third of all the population lives, and it is on both banks of the Daugava river. That is a very big river, over 700 miles long, starting in Russia, flowing in 3 countries, Russia, Belarus and Latvia. And it was a very famous trade route. It was called a road from Varangians to Greeks, connecting the Baltic Sea and the Black Sea. And the city was growing on trade predominantly since its foundation in 1201 by the leader of Catholics. Christians to these lands that up to the end of the 12th century were inhabited by pagans. But a big cathedral that you are going to see on your right in a moment, Nativity of Christ within Orthodox Church, is a central with the Russian Orthodox community. That is quite big, as Riga is not only the biggest city of Latvia, but also the most cosmopolitan, with different communities historically cohabiting, and that is why different religions, Latvians being predominantly Lutherans. That's since the 16th century, when Germans brought here the teaching of Martin Luther. And the statue that you can see on your right is dedicated to the glory of Latvian independence, and that was built during the first independent republic times in 1935. Independence of our country was in 1920s and 30s. We will finish our tour on the opposite side of Freedom Statue as we are driving by the symbolic borderline of Old Town and Central City. Old Town is on the opposite side of the canal, but Central City is on our left, and on your left you can see the oldest building in New Riga. That part of the city was called New and started to be built at the end of the 19th century. And one of the first buildings constructed was today's central building of Latvia University that we just left behind. One of our old main educational establishments, the youngest of the universities in the 3 Baltic countries, end of the 19th century. But the oldest of polytechnicums in Imperial Russia, as this institution was founded as Riga Polytechnicum under the Russian Empire. As these areas around us were constructed when Riga was under Russian Tsarist rule. And I just mentioned the city canal on your right, flowing into the Daugava river, encircling Old Riga both sides. And it's very easy to distinguish where you're in Old Town or not. If you're inside the circle of water, you're in Old Riga. But on your left is something very modern. That's the train station complex. And you can take local and international trains from one central station building. You have just one station in the city that also is surrounded by shopping centers like Stockholm that you can see on your left, and a big center of cinemas or movie theaters, 14 under one roof, just side by side with Stockholm. Under the train bridge you can see crowds of people. If you look under it, that's one of the approaches to the most frequented place in Riga, Central Food Market, that was opened in 1930 during the first independence, and ever since is one of the biggest farmers' market in Europe, if not the biggest. The most advanced technically, definitely, when open, was dried in the 17th century. There is no more Riga River, but the Daugava River is now on your left, with the arched bridge just for trains, and the rest of the bridges being for wheeled traffic. So altogether there are 5 bridges to connect both banks of the Daugava. In the 18th century, on the opposite side of the river, it has been existing for quite a few centuries already on our side of the river, since early 13th century. And there are quite a lot of really modern post-Second World War structures on both sides of the river, as the most serious damage Riga in the Second World War acquired in the areas near the river, as the port and bridges were built, and hence both the right side and the left side of the rivers suffered. And, just across the river, when we move up slightly up, you will see a big triangular grey building, the Castle of Light. That's the nickname of the National Library building, the most famous of contemporary architecture. All the prices are growing up, but including this fuel for cars, but the number of cars is only growing. How you can explain it? I don't know. The most famous of the bridges is ahead of us. That's a steady cable or a suspension bridge. You will see it, probably you can see it already, I can see it quite well through the front window. But it is really a very interesting bridge by its construction type, with considerable weight held by those metal ropes, and on its left is quite an interesting piece of modern architecture, this elegant silhouette, Swedbank offices building. But the old town is on our right side, and the town hall building with carillon and turret on the right is the place from which we are going to start our old town tour. That will be the last phase, stage of our exploring Riga, but the last but not the least, because that's the medieval heart of the city that was founded in early 13th century and was a fortress up to the middle of the 19th century. Only since the second half of the 19th century the city started expanding, and it has expanded so much that old Riga today is only 1/600th part of the city. The area has grown considerably, as you can see, ever since. And now we're nearing castle of Riga. In the 13th up to the 15th centuries, they built their strongholds, their castles. This new castle of Riga was built in the 14th century, and ever since it was the residence of all the powers. German knights and their masters. Then we had Polish rulers, Swedish rulers, Russian rule, Russian general governors. And when Latvia became independent, then it became the residence of the presidents of the country. Now it's the office of our president, and you can see two flags on this round tower facing the river, the Tower of Holy Spirit. And that means that our Mr. President is in the country, and today he's giving the so-called Crimean Conference, the mouth of the Daugava River that flows into the Riga Gulf of the Baltic Sea, and Riga Commercial Port is in the very mouth of the river. But passenger port is on your left, and you can see one of the big cruise ships that come to Riga in high season. High season is summer, as the rest of the year is not so positive. Speaking of the weather, not as brilliant as today. And you can see a big German ship. That means that in Old Town we will come across quite a lot of German groups. Probably. Let's see. And a bit up to the left is a tiny building of Riga passenger port, where two ferry from Stockholm used to come in the previous days. That means pre-COVID days. The Daugava is much water, full of water. It's an ancient Baltic name, but in Russia and Belarus it is known as the Western Dvina. And not only by the Daugava we can divide Riga, but also by the steps of its building, its construction. And then the third step was the post-Second World War residential suburbs, where mainly Rigans reside today, coming to work to the city center, but not to the areas that we're in, not to the buildings that are on your left. There's this part of the city center that we call the nest of nobility, or quiet center, is predominantly residential. It is very quiet center, very prestigious, elite corner to live. And that is why these condominiums are very expensive, and also there are lots of embassies in this area. Trench wars, like wars with Napoleon, not only in Russia, but here. At that time it was Russia. That is why some streets have names of the Tsar's families, and this beautiful street has the name of that beautiful German princess. On your left you can see front gardens with signs and flags of different embassies, and we are actually getting ready to get off the coach for this first stop, 35 minutes or so. And what you will need definitely is your headsets, because I will explain to you why Art Nouveau style is so important and so well expressed in Riga and on and forth, and probably your cameras or what you're going to need in this span of time. UNESCO is its old town, medieval architecture that we will see when walking there, and also we have the largest number of wooden houses among European capitals. That's wooden collection is also UNESCO protected. So the whole list of things in Riga's architecture being protected by UNESCO. Now we are driving again on the side of the canal that is in the park on your right. And the next coming building on the left side was once the embassy of the USA. The embassy moved to the opposite side of the river to a bigger and safer building some 10 years ago, but a few other embassies stayed here at this boulevard that in 1920s and 30s was the area of embassies. And when independence was given back, the countries that had their embassies then got them back, like the embassy of France on your left. The second is the Embassy of Germany in neo-Gothic style. Germans like neo-Gothic style a lot. Passing by again, lots of boulevards here are one way. That means that you have to take certain scheme of traffic, like scheme, you can't change it. And on your left is the Embassy of Germany. The countries that recognize Latvia as an independent country, because the name Latvia appeared only in 1918, and for 2 years, and more even than 2 years, Latvia had to protect its independence, fighting for it in the wars. Again, on your left is the university with 3 rows of steps. Students never take central steps. They believe that in this case they would not pass exams or tests successfully, and they avoid these central steps. They use them only for photo taking at the graduation ceremony that takes place in this historical central building. So, children are all around with flowers starting their year of studies on the 1st of September. Again, train station with the Riga clock, this tower clock in the center, made of once a water tower. Up to February, we had a very popular direction for trains going to different parts of Latvia, because we have a very good network of train tracks, and in summer, especially on a day like today, half-an-hour train to Jurmala, that's resort, soft sandy beaches area, half-an-hour ride from Riga is very, very popular, especially on weekends, but also after work one can just catch a train and go to swim, to sunbathe, to take a stroll along the beach, wide, soft sandy and broad, and long, 25 miles is the length of the beach. But coming back to the tracks, they are not wide enough to go west, and this huge construction going on with the restrictions for traffic, like you can see it on your left and your right, is because of a very big project that is being already implemented since this year, called Rail Baltica. From Tallinn to Riga, from Riga to Warsaw, from Warsaw to, to Vilnius, from Vilnius to Warsaw. And on to the west, wider gauge tracks will lead. As railroads were launched under the Imperial Russia, and they are narrower than in the West. 7. We call this building Stalin's birthday cake. Why Stalin's? Because it's evidently this Stalin's Gothic or Stalin's Empire style. 7 Sisters of Moscow have quite a few outside today's Russia, with the only sample of this style being here in the Baltic countries, 3 Baltic countries speaking, because there is one in Warsaw like this, and there are a few more in Bucharest, and even in Beijing there is a building, this Stalin's Empire style. As Stalin was impressed by this Empire State building, by high buildings of New York, and he sent a group of architects to the US, who came back and built not only high buildings, tall buildings, but also broad buildings to stress the stability and grandeur of the empire. Especially big, this building is in the background of small houses, typical to suburbs, as once, when Riga was a fortress, suburbs were inhabited also by ethnic principle. Here lived Russians, merchants, workers, quite a lot of old believers, those that escaped Russia being persecuted by the government, by the Tsar, because they didn't accept the reform in their Orthodox church. Quite a few Catholics, and also when Jews were allowed to settle in Riga, that was starting with the 18th century. They were allowed in small numbers originally to come to the city, then bigger numbers, but they had to come back to this place, and the ghetto was organized by the Germans here, with the area of 13,000 people inhabited. Before that was that of over 30,000. And then almost all that community was exterminated in cold blood, being shot in the forests, and that is why this museum on your right hand side, called Riga Ghetto Museum. Not only a big exposition dedicated to the community, but also to see how Ghetto House was looked inside. The building that belongs to the museum is one of 13 similar type of brick buildings built as warehouses at the end of the 19th century. When the name of this complex is Spiteri, like German Speicher, storage. And they are also quite nice pieces of architecture, apart from being a center of culture. You can see what I was speaking about, saying that the approaches to bridges are quite heavily jammed up, that make it a way of subsistence, or berries pick up in the forests and come here to sell to those that can't go there or don't want to go there but want to eat them. And when the doors of the market were open, it was also the most advanced technically in Europe, as under the pavilions there are 4 pavilions, like you can see them on your right, connected with each other, one slightly apart, but under them there is a big road full of refrigerators, full of storages, arranged even so as for smells not to mix with the elevators, with central heating, with the conditioning over there. So in 1930 it was like the best of the best markets, and much better than the previous market that was just on the embankment of the Daugava river. And this is a covered market with a pavilion so spacious as the frames of Zeppelin hangars were used as those for the market pavilions. Very bright idea. One of the biggest of Hanseatic League. The local merchants even didn't have to go far to trade. They could easily make money on transit trade because of this excellent location. And Poland, a big country, up to 1621, at the beginning of the 17th century, when the Swedish king entered the city, almost for a century. As in 1710, Peter the Great, that had his own interest in Riga, as when he was in Riga while it was a Swedish town, he was not treated well. He was really treated very badly, got under the Russian rule. In 1721, most of today's Latvia was joined to Russian empires. Strategically, Peter the Great wanted an outlet to the Baltic Sea for the growing empire. Ukraine was already joined, so today's Baltic countries also were on the list, and they were joined then, and a window to Europe was broken. Also, Peter the Great westernized culture then in the empire. Anyway, up to independence in Latvia, up to 1918, today's Latvia was in the empire, and 1920s and 30s was the time of the First Republic. Then Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, Soviets, then Germans, and in 1991 independence is back. 2014 was the year when Riga was the cultural capital of Europe, and due to that year, the construction of this National Library building that you can see on your left a little bit ahead of you was over. Also, half a year, Latvia was the president country in the European Union, so lots of political venues took place in the building. While crossing the Daugava River on your left, you can see a few islands. And on the island of Hares, the TV tower stands. You can see this Riga Eiffel Tower, very elegant, and the highest TV tower in the European Union. It's far over 1,000 feet tall, 368 meters. Side by side is the TV center building. But the building that we are going to visit is also modern. It was built as the first Radisson in the three Baltic countries in the year 1995. It's called the Radisson Daugava, as the river is the Daugava. And we will have a stop to combine both pleasures, to take photo of the panorama of the old town with Riga Castle, yellow four-towered complex and steeples of churches, and to use this zebra crossing that we are crossing at the moment to go to the hotel, to the restrooms. With the roosters being placed on the spires of the churches when the churches became Lutheran. Before that, the roosters were on private houses of Rigans to protect people from devil, as the devil escaped to hell at the song of the rooster. Another big function of the roosters on spires of high churches was to be visible from all over, and to show the direction of the wind. For people who lived in the city, that developed on the trade operations. And the first roosters were not all gold painted. They was golden, one side was black. When the wind blew from the sea, promising lots of ships in the harbor of Riga, roosters turned their golden sides to the city, because the city was only on the opposite side of the river, on the right side where the hotel is. When the wind blew from the earth, then the black sides of roosters were turned to the city, to people, and they knew that on that day they didn't have to hurry to the port with no gold money and goods, like on a good trading day. And then roosters became symbols, like a symbol of old town, of Riga's hospitality. As the most affected by the Second World War areas are on the riversides, the area with which we will start our walking tour is also quite modern. The black box, now it's on your left, so you will get out of the coach, will pass it by, is the Occupational Museum. The museum that tells us about the period of 1940-1991, that of Soviet and then Nazis occupation in the 800th birthday of Riga that we celebrated in 2001. So that is the first step of our walk in Old Town, the town hall square that will show us the replicas of the original buildings. And then we will go stop by stop, explore Old Town and finish our tour at near Freedom Statue, in Old Riga near Freedom Statue. That will be at 12 o'clock. And then those who will go to the Occupational Museum.
So it means those of you who are going on optional tour, we will meet then at 2 o'clock on the bus, and the bus is just around the corner, you know, the hotel. But also those of you who are not going on the optional tour, and you want to leave some of your possessions on the bus, you can come at 2 o'clock or just 5 to 2 and you can pick them, yeah?